How Old Saxon and Brittonic shaped Anglo-Saxon. Let's get right into it. So, what inspired me for this video, partly, is this quote from Joseph Bosworth, who's well known for the Bosworth Taller Anglo-Saxon Dictionary, where he says here, "We do not know the exact form of the Old Saxon from which the Anglo-Saxon was derived." So this is quite telling because this is an authority figure on, well, Old English Anglo-Saxon, if you will, saying this, that okay, that this language in part, I would say, comes from Old Saxon, which is really interesting of itself. Moving on. So the focus of this video will be on the verb to be and in the present form. And I do have to say that this video is also going to be fairly hypothetical, and you'll see why. So we have our verb to be here in three different languages. We have Old Saxon, Old High German, and Gothic, right? So we have here in the Old Saxon, we have our wesan, that's to be. We got bium, we got bis and bist, that's like saying you are. We got ist and ist, that's like is in English. We got sind, which is interesting with itself. This is the plural present to say we are, you are, they are. Old Saxon only has one form for this, whereas Old High German and Gothic, they have three forms, three different conjugations, the different persons in the plural, which is interesting in itself. So it goes to show in some ways that how in other Germanic languages have been fairly conservative and remain the same, whereas others have changed in different ways. So that's something to bear in mind. With Old Saxon being our premise here, we have our bium, that's am, that's bis and bis, that's you are. We got ist. I have hypothetical conjugations of the verb to be. So birum would be like saying we are, biruth would be like saying you are, and sin would be like saying they are. I mentally speculate that with Old Saxon, and this is pre-9th century, because Old Saxon itself, what we know from the literature, dates roughly from the 9th century to the 12th century. All right, we don't really have anything. I mean, yeah, there are a few words that we do have that predate the 9th century, but as far as this verb conjugation, the plural forms, I would think that Old Saxon dropped this fairly early. I'm willing to think, I don't know. It could be the case. Moving forward into Old West Saxon, we have our wesan, we have our beon, and this is our infinitive to be. Beon may actually be a later innovation. I'm not too sure when, but you don't see words like beon as the infinitive in other Old Germanic languages. It may actually be a product via analogy of the first person singular present. If we look at the forms of the Old Saxon here, biun and bium, this may be the origin of where the infinitive beon may come from. I'm not too sure. That's just a off the fly guess. But moving on. So we have our beom, meaning I am. We got bist, you are, and bist is identical to bist in Old Saxon. We have bith and we have beoth. The he is and the we, ye, they are. Where do these two conjugations come from? Well, I have two ideas. Let's get right to it. So here we have bith and beoth. What are their origins? Well, I have two theories, two ideas of where possibly how these words have come about. And this is through the process called analogy. Analogy simply explained, or in the smallest of nutshells, is how one part within the same language becomes more dominant within itself. For example, very off the fly, English, Old English had many plural endings, and then as time moved forward, these plural endings got fewer, and to the point where now we just use the plural s, or occasionally in archaic contexts, people say one ox, two oxen. That's pretty much analogy in a nutshell. But anyway, so our first theory is that possibly by analogy, by the influence of, if you will, the second plural second person plural biruth, and within that the first person plural birum, which may play a role, and this is like hypothetical Old Saxon pre 9th century, would make up or influence how we have bith and beoth. That's one idea. But then we have another idea through the Brittonic side of things. You know, the Britons with their language, and they too have words that are very similar to Old West Saxon, if you will. And we have here, and forgive me for the bad pronunciation, I don't speak Brittonic, but I'll give it a shot. So we have bith and possibly bidun, which seems the fact that it's identical to the Old West Saxon, almost identical, which is really interesting of itself. And if I were to guess between these two languages here, I would think it would be the Brittonic, because we know through the historical record that you have Celtic people in Germanic graves, you have Germanic people adopting Celtic names, and thirdly, we have within our language, very the base form within our verb to be. This shows a lot. This shows a lot of interaction. This shows alliances. This shows possibly negotiation, diplomacy, or what have you. Small aside, in Old Northumbrian, and Old Northumbrian, for those who don't know, is one of the Anglian dialects from the Angles, if you will. And in Old Northumbrian, we have, very interestingly, this bidun, biodun, and biodon of the verb to be. So it's like saying, like, we, you all, and they are. And we have, and this looks very similar to the Brittonic bidun. So that's really interesting of itself. But this is a small aside because Old Northumbrian is an Anglian dialect, and we're really here to talk about Saxon. So moving right on. So British Saxon. So this would be what proverbially, hypothetically, would be what the Saxons brought over into Britain. And the term British here, I'm using this as a geographical term, but this chart I have here, this paradigm is very roughly done. It's more to bring a point out of getting like a very extremely rough idea of what the Saxon language would have looked like. Even though, despite the fact that the past and the future, this is mostly from Old Saxon, and in some ways Old Saxon is fairly conservative in its as a language, in many of its word forms and all that. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. And then moving on to Brittonic Saxon, and where we have the bith and beoth, and so this would be Brittonic Saxon. Of course, the future forms, that's from the Old English Weradan. Then we get into something more complex, Anglo-Brittonic Saxon. So we're adding on like Lego pieces, if you will. So this is what you would see in typical Old English, if you will, or Anglo-Saxon. We have our Anglian part, and this is where we have the am and the art and the arun and the r, in the singular and plural. We have our sins. So this is our. It gets interesting because the Anglian part is kind of a proverbial. Well, not proverbial, like, because the Angles themselves, they're very closely tied with the Danes, so it's quite fair to say that the Angles were in some roundabout way, are a Scandinavian people. I would argue, if you want to go back to their origins and like they just lived right under the Danes or right near the Danes or under. Well, yeah, they lived under the Jutes. A Scandinavian people, right? So anyway, so interestingly enough, with this Anglo-Brittonic Saxon, that the B forms become the future, and the aeum, the R form, or the or as known as academia, the S form becomes the present. But our was and were and was and weron, they remain the same. That form doesn't really change that much. And then we got sind, that's something you see throughout Germanic languages. So here we have Anglo-Saxon proper, I would argue. All right, we have our Anglian, we have our R form, we have our conjugations that come from wesan, with was and were and was and weron. And then for the future, we have our Saxon, biome and bist, and then we have werdeth and werdath, and so this is from the verb werdan. So this would be taking a page from Old Saxon, where the way Old Saxon expresses the future to say I will be using the verb werdan. Similar to today's German werden. In this chart I have presented before you all is what would be actually accurately to call Anglo-Saxon, because there's no Brittonicisms in here. So yeah, arguably, I mean, you could use for the future werdan entirely, but this is just a rough estimate. And for sake of for why nots, if you will, this is what full Anglian would look like. To my imagination anyway. So you don't have the Saxon B form. You just have the werdan, just your future to be, and you have your present in R form, or if you will, S form, and you have your past form of was, were, was, and weron. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. And that's it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe. And if you really like the channel, please become a patron at my Patreon page down below. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.